At 19, my world crumbled when my sister, Isabella, subtly but sharply, called me an embarrassment to the family. This was followed by my father changing the locks and my mother leaving my clothes on the porch, offering no explanation or goodbye. They labeled me reckless and unfit, but the truth was, I couldn't stay silent about their actions. For 15 years, I vanished. I changed my name, cut my hair, and erased every trace of my old self, not out of shame, but because I knew they'd never let me rise if they knew who I truly was. One afternoon, I walked into a courtroom where Isabella was on trial. I didn't need to speak. The judge's recognition, "Wait, is that Camille Reyes the governor?" said it all. Every head turned, Isabella's mouth agape. In that moment, years of being buried under their silence finally broke open. They used to call me a failure, but now, the world was finally seeing me. Growing up, I was always the strange one in the Reyes home. While my sister Isabella was celebrated for pursuing law, I was quietly sketching, reading philosophy, and painting. My graduation with a humanities degree went unnoticed by my family. I didn't even bother to tell them the date, knowing they wouldn't come. The storm hit when a private video of me from spring break was leaked by my vengeful ex-boyfriend. Isabella found it first, sending it to our father, Manuel, not to protect me, but to preserve the family name. That night, dinner was replaced by Manuel's fury. He disowned me, tossing my university diploma like a bill he refused to pay. My mother, Teresa, stood silently, rosary clutched tight, unable to meet my eyes. Isabella, my own sister, remained cold and still. I packed my life into a few bags, clothes, sketchbooks, journals, and my trusty red backpack. Manuel placed my bank card on the table, his words chilling, "Don't call. Don't write." My mother watched from behind a curtain as I stepped out into the dusk, no wave, no goodbye. The first week, I slept in a friend's car until their kindness ran out. By day 7, I was on a Greyhound, heading north to somewhere quieter, somewhere no one would care who I used to be. On that journey, under a Santa Fe overpass, I performed a small, defiant act. I tore out the pages of an old family notebook, feeding them to a small flame until only ashes remained. Staring at my reflection in the bus mirror, tired and betrayed, I whispered, "I've got nothing left to lose, so I'll start with what's left of me." Denver that winter was harsh, the cold seeping into my very bones. I lived in a rundown apartment, working constantly, serving pancakes in the mornings, cleaning clinics in the afternoons, and inputting data at night. In the quiet hours, I wrote fragments in a secret code, my way of bleeding without leaving stains. I painted too, creating a piece that looked like a body collapsing into its own shadow, hidden in the corner of my room. One morning, without warning, I cut my hair, watching the strands fall like dead petals. It wasn't dramatic, just a decision, a shedding. I registered a new name at the job board, Camar, just enough to hide in plain sight, to become someone new. My turning point came during a graveyard shift at the clinic when I intervened to protect a terrified woman and her child from an officer. My lie about outdated papers worked, and soon after, I was offered a job at Procto Lib, a nonprofit helping undocumented immigrants, 0009:58. Rafael Delgado, the director, said, "Most people don't do what you did." My reply? Most people still have something to lose. I started from the bottom again, but I watched, I learned, I absorbed. I drafted proposals, wrote outreach plans, coordinated grants, and balanced budgets. I studied immigration law, attended city council meetings, understanding the language of power. I never used the word home out loud, but one day, I told an intern, "I don't have a family to go back to, so I'm building a place where I might belong." In the spaces between doing good and staying invisible, I slowly remembered how to breathe. 3 years later, my voice, once choked with fear, carried like thunder in Denver's City Hall. I had become a familiar presence in immigrant advocacy, sharp and unapologetically principled. I earned a place on the local Immigration Policy Advisory Council, wielding real power that shaped legislation. During a tense meeting, I stated, if the law refuses to grow with justice, then justice stops being lawful and starts being ornamental. The room fell silent, and a few people clapped. A journalist approached me, eager to feature me as a local leader, immigrant advocate, the face of change. I agreed, but only if they didn't use my full name, insisting they call me C. Reyes. When asked about the secrecy, I simply smiled and said, I've already been seen in the wrong ways. Every night, I lit a candle in front of an old family portrait where I had scraped off my own face. I whispered the same words, be remembered for what you do, not what they called you. My colleague, Marion, once asked if I'd ever let people know who I really was. I replied, I'm not hiding. I'm just not ready to be seen by people who used to look right through me. A few weeks later, I announced my intention to run for the Colorado State House of Representatives as an independent candidate. My voice was unwavering, I'm not here to represent a party. I'm here to represent the people who are never invited to the table but who carry it on their backs every day. My campaign materials were clean, policy-focused, with no smiling headshot, just a slogan, let the work speak first. And with that, I stepped into a different kind of fight, for myself, for the right to rebuild without asking permission, without apologizing, and without being seen unless I chose to be. Then, a headline appeared that shook my carefully constructed world, District Attorney under investigation for evidence tampering. The name was all too familiar, Isabella Reyes. I hadn't spoken that name in years, but there it was, bold and unavoidable. A whistleblower had accused Isabella of manipulating evidence in an immigration trial, jeopardizing her career and freedom. My press team advised neutrality, but I couldn't ignore the ghosts in that courtroom, one of whom bore my name. I booked a flight to San Antonio, alone, without fanfare. I entered the courthouse through a side door, taking a seat in the last row, in the shadows. The courtroom was cold, Isabella impeccable and controlled, yet tense. When Judge Audrey Jameson entered, her eyes landed on me. Wait, is that Camille Reyes the governor? Silence enveloped the room. Journalists gasped, cameras swiveled, reporters whispered frantically. Isabella's head snapped back, her eyes, once disdainful, now wide with disbelief. My mother, Teresa, turned white, whispering something, a prayer or a curse. Manuel, my father, squinted, as if trying to comprehend the ghost of his disowned daughter, returned with flesh and power. I didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't wave. I simply sat still, my spine straight, my presence alone a statement. The judge composed herself and proceedings resumed, but the air remained charged. I stayed until adjournment, then walked out the same side door, no one calling after me. By the time I reached my hotel, my phone buzzed with missed calls and texts from news outlets. My face was on the news, my name trending, but this time, it was presence, not scandal or shame, that brought me there. Watching the city lights from my window, my reflection was no longer a shadow, but something substantial, something truly seen. Camille Reyes had returned, not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a reckoning. Within 24 hours, my name dominated the news cycle, my secret past unearthed. Headlines screamed, Colorado governor's secret past, from scandal to Senate, the forgotten Reyes. Is Camille the real star of this family? Then, the real storm hit, the old, grainy spring break video resurfaced, pixelated but unmistakable. My ex-boyfriend, interviewed on a talk show, smiled sheepishly, claiming I knew he had the footage. I watched the segment alone in my office, my hands still, my face blank. I didn't flinch, didn't call for damage control. I let it air, let it burn, because I was done running. When my staff panicked, I simply whispered, let them look. I've survived being seen before. Then, Manuel called, his voice sharp, commanding, as if I were 16 again. You're using our name for your own gain, he said coldly. I leaned back, my fingers tapping my desk. I've carried that name longer than you carried me, I said evenly. I didn't ask to be a Reyes. I stayed one to remind myself who not to become. He hung up. That night, Teresa was rushed to the hospital. Against every instinct, I booked a red-eye flight. In her hospital room, my mother looked small, not the stern woman I remembered. Our eyes met. Camille, she whispered, her voice brittle. If what they say is true, then I've spent years not seeing you. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't cry. I sat beside her, took her hand gently, and held it in silence, not seeking or offering forgiveness, just being myself. When she drifted to sleep, I pulled a small canvas from my bag and left it on her bedside table. It was a painting titled Witness, a woman standing in a desert, her silhouette stretching long behind her. I walked out without a note. Back in Colorado, the media frenzy continued. I gave no interviews, no tweets, no curated statements, but I didn't retreat. At the next cabinet meeting, I entered with my usual calm. I won't rewrite the past, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, but I will decide how it gets used from here on out. My silence, earned and undeniable, was louder than any headline. The indictment against Isabella landed like a slow-burning scandal. Legal circles abandoned her, former colleagues spoke of betrayal. Her name, once spoken with pride, now clung to shame. I watched it all, stone-faced. Then, my mother called, her voice thin and trembling. "Mija," she cried, "please, just come home. Just once, come for dinner." Later that night, a text from Manuel, "We need to talk." 15 years of silence, of pretending I didn't exist, and suddenly, they remembered my number. Against every instinct, I said yes. That Friday, I arrived at the Reyes house just before sundown. The porch looked smaller, the air inside thick with lemon oil and nervous energy. They were all there, Teresa, trembling, Manuel, stiff, Isabella, head bowed. My old chair had been reupholstered, new leather covering a splintered frame. The meal was elaborate, but no one touched it. Teresa tried to fill the silence with false cheer, reminding me of drawing on napkins. Manuel even commented on my professional campaign posters. Isabella finally spoke, her voice quiet. "I know I messed up," she said, I never thought it would go this far." Then came the shift. Teresa, reaching for my hand, suggested, "Maybe you could say a few words to the federal prosecutor? Just a small recommendation, nothing formal, just help family." I looked around the table, my mother, tears clinging to hope, my father, eyes sharp despite his false softness, Isabella, reduced to silent desperation. I put my fork down, the click echoing like a judge's gavel. "If I weren't the governor," I asked, my voice level and unblinking, "would I still be your blood?" No one spoke. The silence was deafening. I stood up, the air feeling lighter the moment I pushed back my chair. "I kept your name," I said softly, "but I built my life without you in it." I turned and walked to the door, my coat brushing my calves. Teresa called out, voice cracking, "Camille, please." But I didn't look back. I stepped outside into the crisp, dry night air, carrying only my own weight. The texts came at 3:12 a.m. Grainy screenshots of the old spring break video, private email exchanges, a photo of me crying outside a Denver shelter. No caption, no sender. I stared at the screen, pulse steady, not fear, just calculation. By 9 a.m., my communications director was at my door, pale-faced, showing me a blog post, "The Real Camille, Leaked Files from the Governor's Past." I didn't flinch. At noon, a discreet call from an old friend in the Justice Department warned me, "Your father's been asking questions, trying to find leverage." This wasn't concern, it was a soft threat. That evening, instead of waiting for the storm, I walked straight into it. The next morning, I stood before a podium in Denver, no flags, no security, just me and a wall of artwork from immigrant children. I wore a crisp white blazer, unarmed but untouchable. "We've all seen how power works," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. "It doesn't always come in the form of violence or laws. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in reminders of who your father is, in threats disguised as family dinners." I paused. "Well, this bill is for anyone who's ever had their past used against them by people who were supposed to protect them." I introduced the Justice Witness Protection Bill, a proposal to criminalize attempts to manipulate public figures through familial pressure or reputation threats. It was bold, personal, and undeniably pointed. I didn't name names, but everyone knew. The media exploded again, but this time, they stood behind me. Editorials praised the bill, op-eds commended my poise. Headlines shifted: Governor Reyes redefines political armor, she fought her family, now she fights for the silenced. Manuel, Teresa, Isabella, silent. No one dared to call. I walked the streets of Denver later that week like any other citizen, no reporters, no cameras. Just a quiet woman in a navy coat, coffee in hand, under the soft golden light of fall. No one stopped me, no one called my name. I like it this way, I thought, because I don't need to be remembered to keep doing what no one else dares to. It was just past noon when my assistant announced, "Ma'am, Isabella Reyes is in the lobby." I cleared my desk, allowing no cameras, no aides, no security. Isabella entered, a shadow of her former self, makeup free, dark circles under her eyes, her shoulders barely held up. The silence between us was thick, familiar, but long buried. "I didn't know how to start," she said quietly, "but I know I ruined what we could have had as sisters before I even realized I was jealous of you." Her voice broke. "I don't want to go to prison, but I'm not here to ask you to fix it. I just wanted to tell you the truth. I stepped on you to climb higher, and now I look up and you're somewhere I can't even see the ceiling of." I watched her, calm and unreadable. "You didn't destroy me, Isabella," I said evenly. "You just forgot I existed, and when someone is forgotten long enough, they remember how to become unforgettable." Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. "Mom still believes you'll save me." I turned my head slightly, looking out the tall windows of my office at the city beyond. "I'm not here to save anyone," I said. "I saved myself so no one could drown me again." Isabella nodded slowly, her voice softened. "Thank you for not hating me more than I deserve." I didn't reply. There was no hug, no forgiveness, no embrace, just an honest silence between two women who once shared a room, a bloodline, and years of invisible damage. As Isabella stood to leave, her hand brushed my desk, revealing a piece of paper, an unsigned letter, a plea for clemency I had written and burned that very morning. It was a ghost of a different call from 15 years ago, when a sister had whispered to our father, "She's the one in the video." The door clicked shut behind her. I sat back down, opened the next draft of my judicial reform package, and began to write again. Some legacies, I thought, can't be rewritten, but they can end with you. The conference on family justice reform was unlike anything I had spoken at before. It was a room full of silenced history, waiting to exhale. Panels on whistleblowers who exposed corruption within corporations, political institutions, and most painfully, within families. Survivors, once daughters, sons, partners, employees, all punished not for lying, but for telling the truth too close to home. I stood backstage, watching a video montage of blurred faces and disguised voices recounting betrayals by fathers, husbands, bosses, blood. The moderator introduced me simply, Governor Camille Reyes, advocate, reformer, daughter. I stepped forward into a quiet that hummed with weight. "I was once called a disgrace," I began, my voice steady from the start. "Then I was erased. Then I was threatened, not with guns, but with memories." People leaned in. "I'm not here to make anyone apologize to me. I'm here so that my future children won't feel like loving their truth means betraying their bloodline." I paused, scanning the crowd. My eyes landed briefly on my mother, Teresa, in the second row, older, smaller, her hands clasped tightly. She didn't speak, but tears streamed silently down her face. Farther back, almost hidden, sat Manuel, no suit, no badge, just an old man watching his daughter speak from a place he'd never helped her reach. Isabella wasn't there, but in the front row, an empty seat bore a sign, reserved for who she once hoped to be. I smiled at the subtle gasps that rippled through the room. Then came the twist. "I'd like to announce a new policy," I said. "It's called the Public Kinship Act, or what I call the Family Transparency Clause. Under this new legislation, public employees could declare familial relationships that posed a conflict of interest without fear of retaliation or being branded disloyal. It was a way to protect whistleblowers not just from strangers, but from those who shared their DNA. Because silence, I said, should not be the price of belonging. The press caught on like wildfire. Headlines read, "A leader who names the wound before it festers." My speech streamed live, some applauded, some cried, some called it too personal for politics. But for once, no one called me the disgraced sister of a disgraced prosecutor. Not anymore. As I walked off stage, no flowers awaited me, no thunderous applause. Just a quiet, grounded sense that I had pulled something out of the ground and turned it into a seed. I didn't need to erase the name Reyes, I had simply rewritten what it meant. 6 months later, I entered a small community center in South Denver. No press, no podium, no fanfare, just 40 folding chairs and a crowd of locals. No one expected the governor to walk in wearing jeans and a long gray cardigan, no staff trailing. I helped move chairs, poured myself coffee, smiling as if I belonged there, because in many ways, I did. When it was time to speak, I stepped forward, no title on the screen, no grand introduction, just 3 words in chalk behind me: ruthless leadership. People ask me all the time, I began softly, but my words struck like flint, how did you make it without your family support? A pause. I didn't make it. I just stopped waiting for them. Laughter bubbled, soft but real. We don't choose our blood, I continued, but we get to choose what legacy we carry forward, and maybe more importantly, which ones we lay down. A woman in her 50s raised her hand. What if one day, she asked, they really change? What if they come back different? I tilted my head, considering. I'll let them tell their story, I replied, warm and calm, but I've already told mine, and I'm not rewriting it. The audience was quiet again, with the hush that comes when something true settles in your chest. That was when I noticed him, Manuel, standing at the very back, next to the wall. No suit, no expression of authority, just an old man watching his daughter speak from a place he'd never helped her reach. I kept speaking, but my eyes held his for a moment, not defiant, not hurt, just clear. When the event ended, people clapped, not out of obligation, but recognition. As they dispersed, Manuel walked slowly toward the front, almost unnoticed. He waited his turn at the mic. I stood still, unreadable. I never understood my daughter, he said, taking a long breath, but today I realized maybe I don't have to. Maybe all I need to do is admit that she did what I never could. And I see her now. No apology, no explanation, just that. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to embrace him. I simply bowed my head, the gesture full of peace, not surrender. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall. Children ran across the frozen park nearby, chasing each other through the playground. I stepped out into the soft white light. I didn't look back, didn't wave goodbye. I just kept walking, alone but not lonely, through the hush of the early winter air. I had once lived just to be seen. Now, I had finally learned to see myself. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight quietly within ourselves, against the weight of the past. But healing isn't about rewriting what's been done, it's about refusing to carry it any further. We don't choose where we come from, but we do choose where we stand. And sometimes, standing alone is the beginning of something unbreakable.